the best thing I did was realize I don't know what to do.
Today's guest is a parent for a change. Normally we talk to someone who's been through something difficult in their teenage years, but today we're talking to a parent who's been through something difficult with their teenager. Heidi L. Gross is the author of Embracing Love, a parent's guide to nurturing and celebrating your child's LGBTQ+ identity. It's a heartfelt resource designed to support parents and family members as they navigate the journey of understanding, accepting, and loving their LGBTQ+ children. Heidi says that the last 5 years have been hard for her son and her family, and they've had to deal with trauma, suicidal ideation, and self-harm. So if any of that is a trigger for you, then you may want to skip this episode. What is important though is that Heidi says that both she and her son, who's now 17, have grown in resilience through the difficulties of learning to live with each other all over again. Heidi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Helen.
It's really lovely to have you here, Heidi. We have talked about transgender once before on the podcast, and I will link that episode. I always think I need to get that episode number in my head before I start these intros, and then I never do. But I'll link it in the show notes. That was a transgender teenage girl who told me about her journey. But I'm really interested to hear the story from the side of the parent as well. Before we get into that, though, Heidi, as is tradition on this podcast, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit, if you will, about your own teenage years. What was it like for you growing up?
It was interesting. I mean, I'm in my 50s now. Probably shouldn't broadcast pro 50s.
Own it.
So I grew up in the 80s, and I was
Yeah.
a latchkey kid, as the term goes for Gen Xers. Spent a lot of time, sort of growing up on my own with my brother, sort of with a very independent kind of an upbringing. Two parents worked out of the home, kind of a situation. And so it was good on one hand because you get a lot of self-reliance and things like that. But what I didn't understand at the time was I was struggling emotionally because I was undiagnosed bipolar. Um,
Oh,
so it was a little bit of a struggle as a teenager trying to figure those normal teenage things out while
right.
also having this additional maybe challenge, but I didn't know what it was. You didn't really talk about it back then.
No.
It wasn't really identified.
Mhm.
And so it wasn't actually until I got divorced about 15, 16 years ago. I was going through a depression and started to seek counseling. And um, I then was diagnosed. And I was like, well,
Wow.
this makes a lot more sense why
Right.
I've been feeling this way since I was a teenager. So it was interesting to look back on my teenage years more through the lens of more, uh, I guess, knowledge
Uh,
about mental health and what types of forms it can manifest itself in, particularly as a teenager. Uh, so it was very interesting to look back when I was going through certain things in my teenage years. I didn't know it was maybe different. I thought this is how all teenagers maybe felt. And so it was interesting to look back
yeah.
on it. And I'm, very balanced now. I've had a wonderful GP who has just embraced my journey, trying to
Right.
figure it out over the last over a decade, and
Mm.
I'm great.
Mm.
But looking back,
Yeah.
being undiagnosed and unmedicated, it was
Yeah.
definitely a challenge, and I think it in a way has helped me in being a little bit more aware or a little bit more
Yeah.
uh, focused on understanding what I don't know. So
Mm.
my journey with my son has sort of followed that same kind of track of,
Mhm,
wait, something's happening. I don't understand it.
mhm,
Let me do a little research and try to figure it out so that I can maybe make their teenage years a little bit better
mm,
than I was. I
mm,
wanted them to feel a little bit stronger as they were a teenager rather
mhm,
than become an adult and look back and go, "Oh, that's maybe why I was feeling the way I was feeling."
mm.
So it's actually was a big help. I
Yeah, 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 yeah. Isn't it always the way the hard thing well, you're gonna talk about this, I'm guessing. I've got an inkling. The hard things are what help us with the things that come to us later on. I
Mhm.
don't know very much about bipolar, so I I don't really understand whether it's something that is genetic, it's inherent, it's in you when you're born, or I mean, I'm guessing, or if it's a response to trauma. How did What's your take on how
Well,
things
it's there definitely is a genetic component to it. It does
right.
run in my family.
Okay.
But again, it wasn't something that you talked about 30, 40 years
Not in
ago.
the 80s, no. There was no
No,
such thing as
no,
mental
but,
health in the
you know,
80s.
it actually took me to get diagnosed in order for my mother and my uncle to actually seek
Ah,
because similar things, it's really
yes.
more of a chemical imbalance
Mhm.
that because of that imbalance, your mood tends to swing.
Yeah.
You can be what's called manic, highly either like overly exuberant or overly aggressive, depending on how it manifests. And
Mm,
then it swings back to acute depression, where you don't want to be out and around people,
mm,
and so it's that swing that
mhm,
makes the imbalance.
mm.
So,
And I'm
a lot
guessing
of
as a teenager that you like I think you said it felt like that was just normal teenage stuff, and were people
exactly.
around you just putting it down to being a teenager? Because that
Exactly.
kinda happens to us anyway because of hormone swings.
And I think that's part of the reason why I decided to do research and then eventually write the book was to help parents identify those distinctions, that it's not just teenage behavior, because
Right.
that's why I think the last 5 years has been a little bit more protracted, is because I was not blowing off, but I was attributing certain behaviors as, "Oh, that's just all teenagers
Yeah.
are like this."
Yeah.
And conversely, it makes you go too far the other way in being a little bit of a helicopter parent when you start to see these swings, and you're like, now I'm blaming it on their mental health and, oh, they're having a bad time, when actually nope,
Right.
they're just being a teenager.
Oh my god, as a parent, you cannot win, can you? Because
No,
you
no. So
is it a problem? I mean, the over-medicalization is something else that just don't get me started on, because 'cause I've done my fair share of that, and then I have also stepped away and said, "No, it's fine. It's just a bruise, a sprain, blah, blah, blah," and lo and behold, someone else insists that I take my child to A&E, and it's a break.
Y exactly. You really can't, like you said, you can't win sometimes, and it's a very fine line because it it's sort of like the medical community when you have a headache and you have maybe a fever. It could be any number of things. We went
Yeah.
through this with COVID where you have all these symptoms, but is it really what you think it is, or is it just the
Yeah.
common cold?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in mental health, it's very much the same way, particularly in adolescents and teenagers, because their body is just naturally
Mhm.
almost chemically imbalanced,
Mm. Mm.
um,
Well,
where
it
they
is.
do have mood swings and they do feel a lot of insecurity, and that's part of growing up.
Yeah.
But so it's hard to maybe identify where your child is maybe struggling more than what would be the norm. And
Yeah.
I think it's important when you have a child that is within the LGBTQ plus community, they're going to have the same stressors as any other teenager, but
Yes.
they may be exacerbated by the confusion or awkwardness or insecurity that they might be feeling, with that taking it up another level. So just to have that awareness when you're talking with your child, I was very lucky and I have always had a very close relationship with my son. So at the age of 12 and 13, when they started having these strange feelings, they were comfortable enough to come and talk to me.
Mhm.
Um, and even that was difficult for them. They were scared. That
Yeah.
when we got to the point a few years ago when they decided to actually tell me, "No, I'm not just gay. I actually don't believe I should have been born in this body."
Mhm.
And they said, I think I might want to transition. They were terrified
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I was going to, like, disown them.
Yeah.
And I find that I am a particularly progressive parent compared to some, and so that really troubled me that as close and as supportive as I think that I had been, they
Mhm.
still were very afraid of
Mm.
disappointing me or,
Mhm.
so it made me really think about, and they've had friends who've come over to my house who may be going through similar types of situations, but they are not allowed to discuss it in their homes at all. Uh,
Mm.
their parents
Mm.
don't refer to them with the pronouns that they prefer. They absolutely don't even acknowledge
Right.
that they wanna be a different gender.
Yeah.
Um, so if my child in a, you know, maybe even more so loving,
Yeah.
supporting environment still has those fears,
Yeah.
what must children who know that their parents are not gonna accept
Yeah,
their
yeah.
identity, how do they feel?
Exactly.
Um
I'm gonna take you down a bit of a tangent actually, now that
Sure.
you've just mentioned that. What why do you think parents do that? Because I totally get that there are some parents who are able to accept, I will talk to you about how it felt for you further into the podcast because I kind of want to know that because I imagine that it feels challenging for any parent to hear that their child is different from the stereotype norm,
Mhm.
because we've built up a perception, haven't we, since our child was before they were even born of what that
Mhm.
child's life would be like,
Yeah,
which is, our bad. We do that. It's quite natural.
absolutely.
So it must feel challenging for anybody. But why do you think those parents fight who find it so challenging that they cannot accept what their child is telling them? Why what happens what's going on for them?
Well, I think it's somewhat generational. I think I'm in a generation that really is bridging the gap between, my mom's a baby boomer, my kids, uh, I have a 26-year-old at two 17-year-olds by marriage, and my second husband and I have a 14-year-old. So in that blended family, they have so much more awareness of these types of, um, I guess, classifications. So back when I was growing up, you were either gay or straight. That was it. That you
Yeah.
didn't have. There was no in between. There was just it was one or the other.
Yeah.
And I think my generation kind of moved the needle a little bit in being able to talk about, are you gay or not? And that became normalized. Now, with the expansion of those categories of being just part in whatever capacity of the LGBTQ plus community, the next generation is going to work to normalize that. But if you
Mm.
still have generations within my age group as well as grandparents and parents who were raised in a time when these issues were just not talked about. They were not the norm. In
Yeah.
some cases, it might be a religious
Right. Yeah.
perspective,
Mhm.
where it's just not allowed,
Mm.
it's not acknowledged. It doesn't exist. It's considered a mental illness because
Mm.
choice. It's not something you are born with. And I don't know if you can ever really get rid of some people's perspectives on that. It's
Mm.
the way they were raised, and they can
Mhm.
either choose to evolve their thoughts or not. And, you know, I'd
Yeah.
like to think that we are moving to a more progressive state where people are, it's a little bit more mainstream to talk about these things, and it's okay to be that.
Mm.
But part of what, I try to identify in the book is that I know we're not there.
Mm.
There's a lot of people who are
Right.
not there.
Yeah.
And part of it, I think, is denial. Like you said, we have a preconceived notion of what our child is going to be.
Mhm.
And when they uh, approach us with this alternative narrative, we're kind of like, but that's not what
Mm.
I envisioned for you.
It's quite shocking, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
quite painful actually to
And I think,
then
yeah.
conceptualize a wholly different life for your child.
And that was, I think, the hardest part of this whole journey. I totally accepted when they said, I think I'm gay. And then when they even came to me with being transgender, honestly, it wasn't the fact that they thought they wanted to be a different gender. It was, strangely enough, and it sounds absolutely ridiculous, but the hardest thing I had was that they wanted to change their name.
That doesn't sound ridiculous at
And
all to
and it
me.
it was such an odd thing because I'm like, I totally support the person you wanna become, but I realized I went through a period of literal mourning
Yes.
for the daughter that I gave birth to,
Yes.
because they didn't want me to have pictures up of them as a kid.
Oh,
They
wow.
didn't
I've
want
got
you.
goosebumps hearing you say
Yeah,
that.
it was
Oh,
it was hard, and my mom, who is very close to my kids and has been really supportive, but is from a generation where you wanna be a boy? I don't understand that,
yeah, yeah.
She totally doesn't get
I'm
that.
thinking about my grandparents. No,
Yeah, I mean,
no.
it's just beyond, but they've been really good, about using the pronouns and trying to refer to them by their chosen name,
Mm.
um, but they have a similar thing where they're like, my child's birth name is Lillian Evans, and I was very, and any Harry Potter fans out there may, you know, pick up on Lillian Evans, but, uh but it was my great-grandparents' names. So,
Oh.
Lillian was my great-grandmother, Evans was my great-grandfather. I'm a genealogist too, so, this
Ah,
whole family history, I went
yeah,
and put a
yeah,
lot of thought into
yeah,
naming them. And so the fact that they didn't wanna be that, I was, like, sad. I was
yeah.
like, "Oh," but,
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I remember sitting for weeks going through baby books, and I'm a very spreadsheety sort of person. So yeah, I even I narrowed it down and took names out, and then I went for the meanings that meant something
Right?
deep to me. And my daughter's not mad about her middle name, and if she changed it, I'd cope, but I even that, just a middle name, I still get a little pang because it's not about the name and who they are for us as parents.
Yeah.
It's about those months of what, and even years for some people, of
Yeah,
dreaming about the child that they might have. And of course, I do understand how the kind of almost hypocrisy in that, and I will own it because it's
yeah,
not my life, it's their life, and they are their own person. And that is one of we could I could really go off on a tangent, but that's one of the things that we talk about on the podcast a lot, is how hard it is for parents, but how crucial it is for children that we get this separation right eventually when they push away from us as
mhm,
teenagers, and we step back and let them become whoever they want to be
mhm.
without trying to mold them back into the image that we had created of them.
Yeah, and one thing I found very interesting in this journey, and w with the book particularly, is I found that I'm not really alone in this, because for a while I was like, "Nobody's gonna get this. Nobody's gonna understand." And I was astonished at how many kids, uh, during their teenage years right now, may not end up being committed to being transgender, but they're exploring it during
Mm.
these years.
Mhm.
And it's not unlike any other teenage period where you try to identify, you want to be your own person, right? So you're like, I'm never going to be part of a clique. But yet, even when you are the outsiders, you have your own clique. I mean, you're still being attracted to certain characteristics of other people that you want to be around. So I think with all of the information that is available about being uh, maybe a different gender, a different sexual orientation,
Mm.
um, I remember when they were like 13 or 14, they came to me and they said, at first they told me that they were gay, which I'm fine with. And then they said they were pansexual. And I was like, I had never heard the term
What
until
is
they
that
mentioned it. And
exactly?
I was like, what does that mean? And that means, well, we love everybody. It doesn't matter what their gender is or their sexuality. We just love everybody. And I'm like, okay. I mean, like everybody has to have a label for something. Sure. Why not? And, so I think there's a lot of experimentation during these teenage years. And I think
Yeah.
parents, particularly, I found because transgender is such, eh, it's more than just like a lifestyle or a way of living.
Yeah.
There is a physical component and a medical
Yes.
component
Yeah.
to transitioning that goes above and beyond just normal sexual orientation. So,
Yeah.
um, I think parents struggle that, oh, they're going to outgrow it or this is just a phase.
Mhm.
And I touch on that in the book because it's something that I still struggle with every day
Mm.
is, are you sure? Because
You got to be sure.
I mean, you can decide I'm gay. No, I'm not.
Mm.
No big deal. No, no.
Yes.
When we start augmenting our body in
Yeah.
order to represent that and we then change our mind,
Yeah, it's huge.
it's a much bigger decision.
Yeah.
So, we have consciously worked with a doctor and said, when is it appropriate
Mm.
physically
Yeah.
to start making those decisions? And, we're getting to that time. We've been told everybody has a different opinion in the medical field, but we've been told some as soon as 16 can start doing it. But
Mhm.
our doctor said, really, you need to wait until they're fully out of, puberty. And I would say 18
Mm.
to 20 is probably the earliest you want to start doing it because your body is going to normalize in terms of the hormone fluctuation. So you don't want to be injecting alternate forms of hormones
Mhm.
to their body when they're not quite fully developed yet. And
Mm.
so, a lot of parents might be, well, they're just going to outgrow it. And
Mm.
maybe some will. Who knows? But
It's
there's
so
a large
hard.
number that are not going to when they make that drastic of a declaration.
Yeah, yeah.
There's usually some commitment behind it. So,
Yeah. And I
it
guess going back to the question of what makes some parents refuse to accept, I'm guessing that for many it's fear a lot of
yeah.
the
Oh,
time.
absolutely.
Um, Not just of what people will say, what people will think, which is our own stuff that we carry around with us, but of yeah, how their family will change and what will happen to their child physically, especially once you get into the realms of surgical intervention. I met a transgender woman who was really interesting, and she told me, I mean, there's a huge debate. I don't know how it is in America, but she she in the UK, there's been so much debate and controversy over puberty blockers. And she was adamant that they're not harmful, that they just delay, so they give a child a bit of time and space to um, make up their own mind, and then if they decide that they're not transgender after all, they can go through puberty at a later stage, and that the it. and maybe she's right, maybe that's absolutely true, but there's so much controversy for a reason, and I
Mhm.
guess it's untested, it's new, like you're saying, it's the generation we're the generation that's well, every generation above us has struggled with this as a concept.
Mhm.
But you talk to my kids who are 17 and nearly 20, and, it's just they don't flinch, that it's just like, "Oh, Harriet, yeah, she's transgender."
Yeah,
Because I noticed that somebody sang on stage with quite a deep voice for a girl. Yeah, "Oh, she's transgender." That's all it is.
exactly.
And
It's
they
very
don't question it.
normalized. It's very
Yes.
normalized, and even the naming thing, I would say of all of their friends, they're now homeschooled, but when they were in regular school, I would say 4 out of 10 wanted to be called something else. And I was like, "What? Not even being transgender, just because."
Yeah, 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 yeah. Even when I mean, I'm very conservative, so there was no way I was ever gonna change my name, and that probably speaks to my relationship with my parents. I would have probably thought I would be in serious trouble, but I started spelling my name with 2 L's instead of 1, which I look back now and I see my signature and go, "Oh, you were such an idiot." But it's just an experiment, isn't it?
Exactly. It's another form of expression, um,
Yes.
and it's so widely embraced by our kids' generation that they don't flinch at it, like you said, like,
Yeah.
"Oh, they're that. Oh, they're that."
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, to them, it's, "Oh, it is what it is.
yeah.
That's just normal."
Which is
And
fantastic that
yeah,
that's how things are going to be, so much more acceptance, hopefully. Um, but yeah, go just to get back to the question of where it's hard for parents, and we haven't even talked about your son yet. When was the first time you knew that something was different than you'd imagined about them?
honestly, I had a very rude awakening, when I found out. I thought I was pretty, in touch, with both of my kids as they were growing up, and, when they were about 12 and a half, 13, um, they had told me that they were gay, and I was like, "Okay, no big deal."
Mm,
And but I got a call. I remember everything about that day in detail. I got a call from the nurse's office at school to tell me that she had found cutting marks on my child
mm,
that I had never noticed.
right.
And that was the first time that I realized something is very, very wrong. It
Mm,
with all of my own history with mental health and things like that, that was never something that I experimented with, had any knowledge or concept of.
mm,
Um, I maybe manifested things in a different way. But so I had a hard time wrapping my head around why someone would purposefully hurt themselves.
mhm.
Um, And it took a lot of research and looking into it to really help me to understand why people do this. And I think it's another example of the widespread information that is out there that
Yeah.
maybe give kids ideas that they probably wouldn't have come up with on their own. Um, so it's sort of a blessing and a curse to have that sort of information at
Mm,
their fingertips all the time. Um, but regardless of where the thought came from, they were manifesting with it. And to this day, 5 years later, medication, therapy, they still sometimes sort of fall off the wagon.
mm.
But they tell me, they're like, "Hey,
Wow.
either I
Mm,
had these thoughts
mhm,
or I did something."
mm,
And it's never life threatening, but
mhm.
it's a cry. It's a cry for help.
Yeah.
And it was not the kind of cry I was expecting or prepared for. So those are the kinds of things that, when I started looking into how do I support my child? How do I prevent things like this happening? I think that was one of the motivators that I had, that I wanted
Yeah.
other parents to know, if you are dealing with this, you are absolutely not alone. There are
Yeah.
thousands of people who are having the same situation with their child. Um,
Yeah.
and it might be earlier, it might be later. Every child is different, but to kind of be aware of those warning signs, because cutting or self-harm is one of those more uh, pronounced, I guess, symptoms of when your child is struggling with their mental health as a result of whatever stressors they might be under. Um,
Mm.
so that was really the hardest thing for me uh, when I first found out. It
Mm.
was it was more of a physical support. I have to protect my child
Mhm.
physically from themselves,
Mm.
but then through, research and talking about it, I learned that this is just a manifestation of a mental condition.
Yeah.
So I wanted, and I was absolutely astonished at how many kids are out there doing this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of people about self harm. We've got two particularly good episodes, actually. One
Yeah.
of which is a lady who doesn't do it anymore, but will not allow herself to say that she doesn't,
Mhm.
because she needs to know it's always there as a possibility.
Mhm.
But she talks about how she stops herself, and it's really interesting. I'll link that one as well, um, in the show notes. But what they all have in common when we talk about it is that it seems to be a physical manifestation of emotional pain, because the physical pain is easier to bear than the emotional pain. Would
Exactly.
you say that's what it was for your son?
Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. Um, and that was sort of like the trigger, right? When they're having a particularly difficult time, that is a release. And like I said, it was not a concept that I could really understand.
Mhm.
Um, so it took a lot for me to look into that and really understand what is the motivation, why, um, and
Mm.
how do I help, right?
Mm.
I mean,
Mhm.
you just how do I alleviate the stressors? And
Mm.
you can't. It's such a hard period of time for teens because they're struggling regardless of what extra things they're going through. I
Mhm.
mean, it's just teenage years are just full of, angst and uncertainty and,
Mhm.
uh, even the most well-adjusted appearing kids out there are harboring things inside.
Mm. Of
You see
course.
these high achieving students who are, high on the dean's list and great in sports, or they're high achievers.
Sure. Yeah.
Inside,
Yeah.
they're struggling, and you
Yeah.
and you don't. But on the surface, they're like, oh, this person
No
has
one bothers about
everything
them.
going for them.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
can never tell what somebody's
No, of
dealing with
course.
under the surface.
So, how did you help? You said, you just wanted to help in this awful situation. How did you?
Well, I think the best thing I did was realize I don't know what to do.
Right.
Uh,
Yep.
and looked at they immediately started going to therapy. Um, and we met with their doctor, their regular doctor, medical doctor. And I just started researching, and it was the best and worst
Mm.
thing to know, because during very early in that first therapist, it was discovered that they had had an incident of inappropriate touching when they were about 5 or 6.
Okay.
and I had no idea. They never told
Wow.
anybody, and it was devastating
Yeah.
that I was not aware of this situation, and, um, so there was a lot to unpack,
Yeah.
for that for them as a child. And so for a while, after learning that, and I even started to make all of the same assumptions that most parents make, is that it's because of this trauma that they want to change genders. They don't really want to change genders. It's because of this trauma. So if I fix
Right.
the trauma, they'll want to go back to being a girl.
Uh-huh.
So you make all of these like excuses and bargains, and at the end of the day, nope, nope, mom, I'm
It yeah.
totally committed to this.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
yes, I did experience that. Yes, I've gone through that. And yes, that might be what is triggering me to do these other things, but that has nothing to do with my sexual orientation or my gender.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it has been a lot of those. I think there's every type of situation that I talk about in the book that I personally had gone through, and said, "Well, it's not that, it's this.
Yeah.
It's,
How
you
can we stop this?
yeah, how
Yeah.
could and you try to rationalize something.
Yeah.
And, what I realized, unfortunately, more recently is that it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. If they decide that this is a phase, great. If they don't decide that this is a phase and this is something they really want to do, you have nothing to say. There's it just as you had alluded to before, is we're trying to make this person able to leave the nest in the best,
Yeah.
uh, most well established way that we can,
Yeah.
and putting our own wants, needs, fears into the situation is not going to help them in the long run.
Yeah.
So, if it is a phase, then let's just ride it out. And I don't mean to make it trite or cliche, but if you had a teenager who just went through this period where all they wanted to do was wear pajama pants and slippers, even when they went out to a store, some parents would like push back and say, no, go put on clothes. And then at some point, you're going to go to Walmart and see every other teenager is wearing, you know, pajama pants and
Yeah.
slippers.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, why am I fighting this?
Yeah.
It's a phase. At some point, it's the same thing. You have to let them figure it out.
Yeah.
And the most important thing that you can do is support them and nurture them through this like it's any other thing in their life. If they had some kind of physical illness, cancer, or some kind of disease, you would approach it completely different. But for some reason, when it comes to something like gender, like sexual orientation, or any kind of mental illness,
Mhm.
we treat it like it's not a real thing. It's taboo. It's
Mm.
something that they can prevent,
Mm.
or you can just choose to be happier,
Mm.
or
Well,
you know,
because we don't want it. I keep going back to this, and I think we have to be honest with ourselves. If it were me in that situation and I was struggling to accept it, it would be because I'm scared.
Mhm.
I don't want something for my child to be really different from the average,
Yeah,
which is all about my fear.
yeah,
And that's what we have to get over, because none of this is about our fear. And
yeah. And I
that
think
even in the if your child really loves to go clubbing and not come home before 5 a.m. in the morning, I was going to say there's nothing you can do about that. There are things you can do about that, but only to a certain extent, and they will circumvent you if they can. Most of them, and actually the healthier ones will. The ones who struggle and may have emotional problems further down the line are the ones who toe the line, which was me as a kid, and did everything my parents said, even though I didn't want to do what they told me to do. So there is no point. So what you just said about ride it out and just wait and see how they turn out, and it's about sitting with that uncertainty, I think, and just allowing your child to be whoever they want. The most important thing for me and the hardest thing to achieve is that my kids know that they can be whoever they want to be and that I will accept all of it whenever they choose to share it with me.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard. So I don't wanna sit here sounding smug. Anyone that's listening, I'm not saying this saying, "I've got that nailed. I know what I'm doing. This is what you need to do." It's really, really hard.
No.
But it's the most important thing we can do, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it got to a point when I realized it really doesn't matter how I try to fix the situation. It's just being there that matters. Just being accessible,
Yeah.
being supportive as they navigate through this. Now, obviously, like every other parent, like you said, you don't. I was scared even when back when they said I'm gay
Mm.
and that was it. I knew from my own personal experience, I mentioned this in the book that a good majority of my oldest and dearest friends just happened to be gay. And I remember being in high school, being in college when they didn't feel comfortable in
Yeah.
coming out yet.
Mhm.
And it was a big deal when they finally decided to do that. And that was the thing that scared me because I realized that even though I'm supportive of it, not everybody is going to
Yeah.
be, and their life is going to be a little bit harder
Yeah.
as a result of this, you know, path that they were going to be on. And as a parent, obviously, you want to shelter your child from any kind of discomfort or, difficulty. And, that was the only thing that at first I was really like, oh, this is going to be tougher for them.
Mhm.
And you don't want that. And then to take it onto a new level of discrimination and bullying by being transgender, I was like, "Oh, are you sure? Are you really sure?" Because I knew that there was going to be times when they were not going to be accepted, and that you don't want that for your child. You want to try to carve the easiest path for them, and at the end of the day, you can't protect them from everything.
Yeah.
So, I have made certain decisions to shelter them a little bit. For example, going the route of homeschooling because
Mm.
they're a very bright child, but they were struggling the last 2 years, with going to school, not missing time,
Yeah.
feeling bullied, not feeling protected in the school district. So I decided to make the change
Mm.
and do a homeschool private academy, and they are an A student. And so, but that has a drawback too because they don't get the socialization they did
Course.
before
Yeah.
either.
Yeah.
So, as a parent, you're constantly juggling what is the best,
Yeah.
you know, thing to do. And, I think the most important thing to know is you're not alone. You are not the only person who is struggling with these uh, different issues. And I think the more that we talk about, more parents of teens talk about these things,
Yeah.
you get sort of a support, community of, well, this is what
Yeah.
worked for me, and this is helpful, and
Yeah. Well, that's what you just said there about things being harder and life not being perfect. I think that's the other hard thing for parents to accept, that there is no perfect. I don't know about you or anyone else listening who's a parent, but as a mum, I remember striving really hard every day to make my daughter's life, she's my first child, as perfect as it could possibly be, and being crushed whenever something went wrong for her. Um, and actually, the sooner we get used to the fact that our kids' lives are not going to be perfect. They probably are going to be hard, whether they've got something different or difficult or challenging or not. Um, just because life is not easy and there's no such thing as perfect. But as a parent, accepting that is harder than an individual accepting it for ourselves. It wasn't until I went through therapy that I realized that what I was trying to do for my daughter was create the perfect fairy tale that
Mhm.
I wished I'd had as a child and still wanted as a grown up.
Exactly. But the other side of that, and this is something when I was doing the dedication, I dedicated the book to my son. It really was. I was like awe. I was awed by looking back through this journey of writing the book. I was looking back over the last 5 years and everything that they had gone through, and I just said that you are a warrior. The
Mm.
resiliency that my child has demonstrated,
Yeah.
um, is pretty remarkable. And so as a parent, you want to shelter them, but at the end of the day, I think that they are actually better prepared going into young adulthood
Mhm.
because nothing really came easy,
Mhm.
and nothing was handed.
Yeah.
They had struggles and they overcame them, and I was very proud
Mm.
to say, "You are doing great." Even in this imperfect world, in this
Sure.
imperfect situation. Um, and I think that's what parents kinda have to do is embrace the supportive side of being a parent while allowing them the space to it's okay to have some struggles because, I have other people in my sphere, my social sphere, whether it be family or friends who have children that maybe as young adults are struggling a little bit more
Mm.
because everything else came easy to them.
Mm.
And it's like, well, because they never had to like
Mm.
overcome anything,
Mm.
you
Well,
know?
and that's not to say that we should be forcing our kids to overcome difficult
Oh,
things
no,
before
no,
they're
no.
ready. But I totally get it because we've had some difficult stuff too, and I do think I always lamented that it made my kids grow up before they should have,
Mhm,
and that is a downside. But equally, like you said, like I said in the intro that you told me, it makes you more able, well, it's less shocking when things don't go entirely your own way all of the time, because that shocks or what I want to say, I think, is that probably all of us, it would be a very charmed existence if we didn't. All of us is going to have something shocking and difficult to deal with in our lifetimes.
mhm,
But once we've had it, then the other things that come after get get easy, not easier, that's the wrong word, but we're able to approach it
mhm.
with more fortitude.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I certainly don't wanna give the impression that we should all make challenges for our kids,
No,
but
and I don't
we
want
do
to
wanna
brush that pain because it's painful and don't want to brush that off. And there's as a therapist, I'm very into, we need to acknowledge the pain you've been through. We need to
Mhm,
grieve, like you said, mourn what happened to you and feel those feelings. It's important. They must not ever be invalidated. But there is something that we can take from it that will help us from going forward.
mhm.
How is your son now, Heidi?
I think after everything that they've gone through over the last 5 years, I think they're doing probably the best that they have been in 5 years. Um, they're still struggling, socially
Mhm.
because being, not in a school setting, they don't have the same friend group that they
Mm.
did before, and they don't have, um, ways of meeting people. So that is sort of like our priority for the next few months is to actually connect them with people their own age
Mm,
in
mm,
different ways.
mhm,
And so I've actually done a lot of community research of, places they can go, things they can do, programs we can join so that they have that interaction.
Hmm.
But other than that, I mean, like I said, this is probably the longest period of time. So their last hospitalization was in February of this year, and this is probably the longest period of time that they've been completely stable and happy.
Mm.
And I feel like we've turned a corner.
Mm.
Uh, so I think their mental health is becoming much more stable, and they're looking to the future for the first time, not just existing.
Mm. Well,
And I think it's
congratulations.
great. I think
Well
it's
done.
really great
Yeah.
to witness.
And just as important a question, because this is really hard stuff, right? As a parent, how have you coped with your own feelings, and what would you say to parents that are just and going through this at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's very important for anybody who is going through some of these challenges. uh Self-care is a big thing, because it's sort of, I equate it to the airplane. Uh you can't help somebody else until you
Oh, yeah.
help yourself.
Yeah.
So put your own mask on
Uh-huh.
and then put somebody else's mask on.
Mhm.
And that was something I kind of was like, it's not about me. It's not about me. And so I
Mm.
sort of ignored some of my own
Right.
struggles, like the mourning of the loss of my daughter. I put that aside and kept saying, it's not about you. It's not about you. Get
Right.
over it.
Yes. It's
But
kind of
the reality
invalidating.
is I can't help but look at pictures, and, something will come up on Facebook, and, they're dressed in a frilly little dress and they look like the perfect, adorable little girl.
Yeah.
And then it comes back and it hits me. And
Yeah.
so my own journey since, probably October of last year has been, okay, you've got to get your own head straight and talk to somebody, not your child, about what
Mm.
you're going through.
Mhm.
Because although we have a nice wide open relationship and I can tell them things and they can tell me things, it's not really appropriate for me to put my baggage
Mm.
onto them. So it was really important to have a third party, and they have the same thing. There are some things I think they struggled a little bit about how they felt when I wrote the book. And so I was like, okay, you have your own therapist. And for the last year, I've been trying to step back from interacting with the therapist and allowing them a safe space to
Sure.
talk about whatever they want.
That's important. Mm.
Yeah. So unless it's something, really serious
Mm.
that's between the two of them. So, um, for myself, I think it's been very helpful in gaining a purpose, gaining some self-awareness of my own needs.
Yeah.
That's been very important
Yeah.
for me. And so I think that's one thing parents should definitely take into consideration, because you're going to have your own feelings about these situations. It's okay to have them. You're
Yes.
entitled to feeling how you're feeling. You're entitled to maybe not agreeing with it, but
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's not for you to have that necessarily conversation with the child.
No.
Take a third party, whether it be a therapist, whether it be a friend, whatever you're most comfortable with, but you need to get it out. Otherwise, it just sits there.
Yeah.
Will
Well,
manifest itself in a bad way. Yeah,
yeah.
the
I mean,
least
you
opportune moment.
you said that it's not okay to dump your emotional baggage on your child, but it is okay to want somebody to help you carry the baggage.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think it's really important that you have conversations with your child of what you're going through. That was important for me, for them to understand, particularly like getting rid of all the pictures of Lillian. I pushed back. I said, I want to be here. I'm going to be supportive of who you want to become,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to bury the person that you used to be. If
Yes.
you want to bury them, that's your choice.
Yeah.
But they existed. I
Yes.
I had them in my life for, 13 years. So you have to understand that I'm going to respect and support the person you're becoming, but I'm not going to forget that
Yes.
you existed in a different capacity before that.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for parents to communicate what their reservations are. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be like confused.
Mm.
I talk about my confusion with my son every day because there's
Mm.
something
Mm.
new that comes up every day, and I'm like,
Mm.
I don't know what that means.
Well, it's a normal human emotion
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, self-care I think is definitely something I would encourage all parents and get to know whatever community your child may be identifying with.
Yeah.
Get to know that community because I guarantee you there's going to be a support group for parents
Yes,
who are in that community.
for sure.
Because you're all going through that same kind of questions and what do I do
Yeah.
so for you to have that connection as well is really I think important for the journey.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Heidi, is the book available in the UK?
It is. It's on Amazon UK.
Okay. I'll put a
Um,
link. And is there anywhere else that you would like people to connect with you?
yeah, I mean, the book is published through my publishing company, which is HG Creative Works. And I have a blog on there, and it links you to wherever.
Oh, you gave me a blog post link, didn't you? That sounded
Yeah,
like it would be something useful for
yeah,
parents going through the same. I will share that too.
yes, and I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and all of
Okay.
those things. So if anybody wanted to reach out, they have questions, they're
Yeah.
just concerned,
Yeah.
totally available.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's important to have somebody who's walking the same path as you or has walked it
Yes.
before you. That is always really helpful. So I will find those links and I'll drop them in the show notes for anybody who wants them. Heidi, it's been really lovely chatting to you today. I wish you every luck with you and your son, all the luck that they need for their future.
This has been wonderful, Helen. This is a absolutely wonderful platform that you're
Thank you.
doing, and I'm so grateful for having the opportunity to come on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give it a rating on your podcast app. And if you know someone who might benefit from listening, do share it with them. It also means a lot when you give me feedback. So if you have comments or suggestions for another episode, or know someone who'd like to tell their story on the Teenage Kicks podcast, do get in touch at helen@helenwills.com or come and find me on my blog, actuallymommy.co.uk. Head over there now for more articles on the joys, and there are many, of parenting a teenager. Bye for now.